The first pilot to notice it is not looking for it. He is 94 miles northeast of the Truman, at 24,000 feet, in the back half of a two-ship section conducting a pre-strike navigation verification on the outbound leg of a night strike profile tasked for a hardened IRGC logistics coordination facility near Shiraz. It is 11:38 p.m. on March 3rd, 5 days into Epic Fury's execution cycle, and the air wing has been flying round-the-clock strike packages since the opening night. The aircrew are experienced. The procedures are disciplined. The navigation cross-check at the 90-mile waypoint is a step in a routine that has been executed the same way on every sortie of the campaign. The cross-check compares the aircraft's GPS-derived position against the inertial navigation system's dead reckoning position, which runs independently of any external signal and accumulates error over time, but is immune to any form of external manipulation. At 90 miles from the ship, after 24 minutes of flight, the inertial system's accumulated positional drift is expected to be between 0.3 and 0.7 nautical miles, depending on the quality of the pre-flight alignment. The two systems' positions should agree to within that margin. They always do. Tonight, on the lead aircraft of the two-ship section, they do not. The GPS position and the inertial position differ by 4.1 nautical miles, northeast to southwest. The GPS is placing the aircraft 4.1 miles southwest of where the inertial system calculates it to be, based on the known starting point, the recorded heading and airspeed, and the elapsed time. The pilot stares at the discrepancy for 3 seconds, the particular quality of attention that a combat aviator gives to a number that should not exist, and then begins the verification procedure. He cross-checks his radar ground mapping against the GPS-derived terrain picture. The radar sees the terrain that corresponds to the inertial position. The GPS says the terrain is somewhere else. The radar is not lying. The GPS is. He calls his wingman on the flight frequency. The wingman's cross-check, run immediately, produces a discrepancy of 4.3 nautical miles. Same direction, same geometry. Both aircraft's GPS systems are showing the same false position offset. At 11:41 p.m., both pilots execute the pre-briefed GPS degradation procedure. They cage their weapon systems to inertial-only navigation, disable the GPS inputs to their targeting pods, and call the Truman's Combat Direction Center on the strike frequency with a single code word that means GPS is unreliable, weapons hold, returning to circuit. The Combat Direction Center watch officer acknowledges and immediately queries the 3 other strike aircraft, currently airborne from the Truman on separate tasking in the same geographic sector. 2 of the 3 report GPS inertial discrepancies within 90 seconds of the query. The third, operating 40 miles further east, reports no discrepancy. The geographic boundary of the effect is beginning to take shape. At 11:44 p.m., the watch officer flags the GPS anomaly to the Air Wing Commander and the Electronic Warfare Officer on duty in the carrier's Electronic Warfare Module, a space adjacent to the Combat Direction Center, whose function, on this ship on this night, has been running continuous monitoring of the electromagnetic environment across the strike group's operational area. The EW officer has been looking at a spectrum display that shows the radio frequency environment across every band his systems can monitor. And for the past 19 minutes, he has been aware of an anomalous signal on the L1 frequency band, the primary civilian and military GPS carrier frequency, that does not match the expected signature of the GPS constellation's broadcast. The signal is strong, considerably stronger than a GPS satellite's received signal at altitude, which is typically around -130 decibel milliwatts at the aircraft receiver. This signal, at the aircraft receiver altitude and range, is registering at levels consistent with a ground-based transmitter operating at high power within 80 to 120 nautical miles of the affected aircraft's positions. The EW officer has been trying to determine whether the signal represents a natural atmospheric anomaly or something deliberate. The two ships' GPS degradation call ends that analytical uncertainty. The anomalous signal is a GPS spoofing transmission, a high-power ground-based transmitter generating a GPS format signal on the L1 frequency, broadcasting false pseudo-range data that tells any GPS receiver within its coverage area that it is somewhere other than where it actually is. The offset, 4.1 to 4.3 nautical miles southwest, is not random. It is a specific, calculated deflection designed to produce a targeting error of sufficient magnitude to redirect a weapons release from its intended impact point to a different location that is 4.1 to 4.3 nautical miles southwest of the intended target. For a strike package tasked against IRGC facilities in southern Iran, a southwest positional offset of that magnitude redirects the computed weapons release point toward the general area of Shiraz's civilian airport and surrounding residential zones. A redirection that, if undetected and uncorrected, would have caused precision munitions to impact locations entirely different from their intended military targets. The IRGC planners understood the geometry. The spoofing offset was not designed to make the bombs miss their targets in open terrain. It was designed to make them hit something else, something whose impact would generate a different kind of operational and strategic consequence than a missed military strike. The EW officer has a bearing on the spoofing signal within 6 minutes of the anomaly call, derived from the directional antenna array in the carrier's electronic warfare system, and supplemented by cross-bearing data from 2 of the escorts. The triangulation places the transmitter source at a bearing and range consistent with a position on or near Abu Musa Island, a small disputed island in the central Persian Gulf that has been under Iranian administration since 1971, and that hosts a documented IRGC garrison with an assessed small unit force of between 80 and 150 personnel. The island is 67 nautical miles from the nearest point of the carrier's current position and 34 nautical miles from the geographic center of the affected aircraft's operating area. The intelligence assessment of Abu Musa that reaches the 5th Fleet Commander at 12:03 a.m. is not a surprise. The island has appeared in IRGC operational planning assessments as a potential platform for electronic warfare operations against U.S. naval forces in the Gulf for at least 7 years. Its position in the central Gulf places it at near-optimal geometry for spoofing operations against strike aircraft, conducting ingress profiles toward southern Iranian targets. Because the island's bearing from the typical ingress corridor means the spoofing signal hits aircraft during the critical 60 to 90-mile range from target when weapons systems are being configured and release parameters are being calculated. That is the window the IRGC planners chose. They did not try to spoof the aircraft during the transit legs. They activated the transmitter precisely when the aircraft were running their pre-release navigation checks, the moment when a GPS inertial discrepancy would be most likely to be detected, but also the moment when an undetected error would be most operationally consequential. The spoofing transmitter on Abu Musa has not been there for 7 years. The intelligence picture that the 5th Fleet's targeting cell begins assembling from the available collection against the island, pulling archived imagery and signals intelligence going back 90 days, shows a construction activity signature beginning approximately 34 days before Epic Fury's opening strikes. A structure consistent with a prefabricated equipment shelter, 8 by 12 meters, was erected in the island's northeastern sector over a 3-night period in early February. 2 vehicles with antenna mast profiles were observed in the same area during a satellite pass 19 days before the operation began. The construction activity was flagged at the time as possible communications infrastructure upgrades to the IRGC garrison, a classification that is consistent with what the imagery showed and that did not generate a targeting or threat assessment action, because communications infrastructure upgrades to a garrison island are operationally normal, and the specific threat application of the equipment was not determinable from imagery alone. The spoofing transmitter was installed in plain sight. The installation looked like exactly what the IRGC wanted it to look like: routine garrison maintenance. The threat it represented was invisible until the moment it activated, which is precisely when the threat profile of a GPS spoofing system becomes undeniable, because the system must broadcast to function, and broadcasting reveals the transmitter's presence, location, and operating parameters to anyone with the sensors to detect it. The IRGC planners accepted that trade. They built a system that would be detected when it activated and would be destroyed shortly thereafter, because they calculated that the window between activation and destruction, the period during which the spoofing signal was operational and uncounteracted, was sufficient to generate at least one weapons release on a falsified targeting solution before the affected crews completed their anomaly procedures and stood down their weapons. One weapons release from one aircraft in the strike package against a position that was 4.1 miles southwest of the intended IRGC military target. That was the operation's objective: not to defeat the strike package, to redirect one weapon from it. The operation failed because the navigation crosscheck caught the discrepancy 3 minutes and 20 seconds before any aircraft reached weapons release range. The 4.1-mile GPS offset, applied to the pre-release navigation check at 90 miles from target, was detectable because the inertial system's accumulated drift at that range was 0.4 nautical miles. A 4.1-mile discrepancy is 10 times larger than the expected inertial drift margin, and the pilot recognized immediately that the number he was looking at was outside every tolerance band he had ever encountered in operational or training environments. The IRGC planners had calculated that a 4-mile GPS offset would not be immediately recognizable as spoofing, that a pilot running a pre-release check might attribute the discrepancy to inertial drift and proceed. They were wrong. The margin they counted on absorbing the anomaly was an order of magnitude too small. At 12:09 a.m., the 5th Fleet Commander's Strike Coordination Cell completes the targeting package for a kinetic response against the Abu Musa spoofing installation. The response uses a Tomahawk cruise missile fired from the destroyer currently holding the westernmost position in the formation screen, a platform whose position geometry provides a clean over-water flight path to Abu Musa that minimizes the missile's transit over any populated area. The Tomahawk is programmed with coordinates derived from the triangulation bearing solution, refined by a terminal imagery update from an MQ-9 Reaper that has been redirected from a surveillance orbit 40 miles to the north and is now holding a 14,000-foot orbit above the island's northeastern sector with its targeting pod, trained on the equipment shelter. The targeting pod imagery, transmitted in real time to the Strike Coordination Cell, shows the shelter with 2 antenna masts visible, both actively oriented toward the bearing of the affected aircraft's operating area. The masts are operational. The spoofing signal is still broadcasting. At 12:17 a.m., the Tomahawk launch is authorized. The missile exits the destroyer's VLS cell at 12:19 a.m., with a transit time of approximately 14 minutes to the target coordinates. Between 12:19 a.m. and 12:33 a.m., the electronic warfare module continues monitoring the spoofing signal. The signal does not change. Its power level, frequency, and pseudo-range data content remain constant, which is consistent with a transmitter operating on an automated broadcast schedule that has not yet received a shutdown command from its operators. The IRGC garrison on Abu Musa is assessed to have a communications delay of 8 to 14 minutes between the time a tactical event occurs in the island's immediate vicinity and the time a response instruction reaches the garrison from its command authority on the Iranian mainland. The garrison personnel operating the spoofing system may not yet know that their signal has been geolocated. At 12:33 a.m., the Tomahawk impacts the equipment shelter. The MQ-9's targeting pod captures the strike in real time, a direct impact on the shelter structure, followed by a secondary detonation consistent with the power amplifier components of a high-power radio frequency transmitter. The two antenna masts collapse within 4 seconds of the primary impact. The spoofing signal drops from the EW module's display at 12:33:41 a.m., 14 seconds after the Tomahawk's impact signature registers on the strike assessment feed. The Abu Musa installation is rendered inoperable in a single engagement. The garrison personnel survive. The Tomahawk's aim point is the equipment shelter, not the garrison building 40 meters to its southwest, and the precision of the terminal guidance keeps the lethal radius of the strike within the footprint of the targeted structure. This is a deliberate choice in the targeting package. The garrison personnel are IRGC members operating on Iranian-administered territory. The legal and diplomatic calculus of striking a GPS jamming installation versus striking the personnel operating it are handled differently at the level of authorization required, and the operational objective, eliminating the spoofing capability, does not require striking the garrison. The equipment is gone. The capability is gone. The personnel can report what happened. The spoofing transmitter was broadcasting for 31 minutes before it was neutralized. During those 31 minutes, it affected the GPS receivers of 7 aircraft operating in its coverage area. All 7 detected the discrepancy before weapons release. 0 weapons were released on falsified targeting solutions. The night's strike package, resequenced after the GPS anomaly stand-down, resumes at 1:30 a.m., with all affected aircraft re-verified on inertial-only navigation and a new pre-strike GPS validation protocol that cross-references GPS position against radar ground mapping as a secondary verification layer. A procedural addition that takes 40 seconds per aircraft and will remain in the Air Wing's standard operating procedures for the remainder of the campaign and beyond. The IRGC's spoofing operation generated one lasting operational change in U.S. carrier aviation doctrine. Every strike aircraft in Epic Fury's remaining sorties runs a radar versus GPS terrain cross-check at the 90-mile waypoint that was not in the pre-campaign briefing package. It is a 40-second procedure. It costs nothing except the time of a single cross-check. It was added because the Abu Musa transmitter showed that the GPS signal reaching an aircraft over the Persian Gulf at night cannot be assumed to be the GPS signal the aircraft's receiver believes it is receiving. The EW officer's post-engagement analysis, completed at 3:15 a.m. after the spoofing signal's termination and the strike package's successful re-execution, produces an assessment that is both technically conclusive and operationally sobering. The Abu Musa transmitter's power output, back-calculated from the received signal strength at the affected aircraft positions, was approximately 1,400 watts, roughly 900 times the effective radiated power of an actual GPS satellite's signal at the Earth's surface. The power level required to achieve a reliable 4.1 nautical mile position, offset at the affected aircraft's altitude, and range from the transmitter, demanded industrial-grade radio frequency amplification equipment, precision timing synchronized to the GPS system's own signal structure, and a signal generation capability that can replicate the complex pseudo-random noise codes used by GPS satellites to authenticate their transmissions. This is not improvised electronic warfare. It is not a commodity jammer that can be purchased and deployed by any actor with sufficient motivation. Building a GPS spoofing system capable of introducing a geometrically precise, directionally consistent positional offset into military GPS receivers requires either a sophisticated indigenous development program or access to technology and technical knowledge that the IRGC obtained through procurement channels that are themselves an intelligence problem. The technical assessment of the transmitter's capability is forwarded to the Defense Intelligence Agency's Science and Technology Directorate at 4 a.m., accompanied by the full electronic collection record of the spoofing signal's characteristics. The DIA will spend 3 weeks analyzing those characteristics against known GPS spoofing systems and their associated development lineages. The preliminary assessment, returned to Fifth Fleet at the end of the first week, notes that the signal's pseudo-range generation architecture shows characteristics consistent with a system developed with external technical assistance. The specific implementation of the timing synchronization protocol is technically distinctive in a way that the analysis team has seen in one previous collection, from a different theater, against a different operational context that has been attributed to a technology transfer involving a state actor with a documented GPS spoofing development program. That attribution will not become part of any public record. It will inform intelligence collection priorities for the following 18 months. The garrison on Abu Musa reports, through Iranian state media, that it sustained damage to communications infrastructure from what it characterizes as an unprovoked attack on Iranian sovereign territory. The characterization is noted, documented, and not responded to publicly by U.S. forces. The legal and diplomatic framework governing strikes on Iranian-administered territory in the context of Operation Epic Fury's authorization is a question that the State Department's legal counsel has been managing since February 28th, and the Abu Musa strike is one of 7 such incidents that fall within a category of engagement that is being tracked separately from the main strike campaign's battle damage assessment. None of those 7 incidents generates a public response from the Fifth Fleet, or CENTCOM. The operational record simply notes the capability that was engaged, the outcome, and the procedural change that was implemented in response. The after-action reconstruction of the Abu Musa operation identifies the following in its classified summary. 34 days of installation activity, classified as routine garrison maintenance. A spoofing coverage window calculated to activate during the pre-release navigation check of strike aircraft on ingress to southern Iranian targets. A positional offset of 4.1 nautical miles in the direction of Shiraz's civilian infrastructure. 7 aircraft affected during the 31-minute spoofing window. 0 weapons released on falsified coordinates. 1 Tomahawk, 1 equipment shelter, 1 secondary detonation, 14 seconds between impact and signal termination. 31 minutes from the first anomaly detection to the transmitter's destruction. And 3 minutes and 20 seconds, the time between the lead pilot's crosscheck and his weapons hold call, that separated an unremarkable strike sortie from an incident that would have been operationally and strategically uncontainable. The GPS signal that an aircraft receives at altitude over a combat zone does not arrive from space alone. It arrives through an electromagnetic environment that is actively contested by every party with the capability and the motivation to shape what the receiver believes. The navigation check is not a formality. It is the last line of technical verification between a precision weapon and the coordinates it was told to reach. The pilot who ran that check at 11:38 p.m. was following a procedure. The procedure was the defense. The procedure held. Every number that enters a weapons system as targeting data carries an implicit question. Is this the number that belongs here, or is it the number someone else wanted to put here? The answer is only available to the crew who asks it. 3 minutes and 20 seconds before weapons release, one crew asked.